academic tutoring, book reading clubs, education forum, and fundraising. We empower and support the youth to work hard and reach their potential. Our volunteers focus on youth development and social responsibility across the United States. We have more than hundreds of volunteers who want to give back and provide academic and extracurricular support to make the youth healthy, confident, and connected. Without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, James Young, who is a 2-time International Science and Engineering Fair finalist. He has 2 publications in separate journals and is an International Conference on Intelligent Biology and Medicine NSF grant winner. One last thing, if you have any questions during our webinar, please send them in the chat or Q&A box, and we'll get to them during the Q&A section after the webinar. Thank you so much, everybody, and please welcome James.
Hello, thank you for the introduction, Justin. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining in tonight. Today, I will be giving my talk on research, but mostly over the value of curiosity. So this is pretty much going to be my journey about how I conducted research through high school, and then how I plan to do it in the future, and then how other students, mostly talking to students here, mostly in high school, if you're in middle school joining in, this applies to you as well, how you guys can get connected as soon as possible if you wish to do so. So first, a little bit about me. I have conducted research for about 3 years now across various disciplines and across various institutions, all virtually. And then I love to travel to conferences and competitions. Traveling has always been a pretty fun thing for me. So when I did research and started producing results and papers, traveling to conferences, the competitions were a win-win scenario for me. Now, lastly, my future aspirations are to work in biotech, which is pretty much an intersection between biology and obviously technology, to where scientific breakthroughs in, let's say, cancer technology, or let's say Parkinson's, something like that. Scientific breakthroughs could be translated into actual results, to products that we could use as individuals who may not know anything about science. So what exactly is research? So, well, Oxford defines research as the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish quote-unquote facts and reach new conclusions. I bolded and highlighted certain terms. For example, systematic is one of the more familiar terms in there that's going to be quite true. Systematic pretty much stands for anything that is following an order or routine, and research is heavily systematic. No matter what field you go into, whether it is scientific or humanitarian research, all research has to follow a set of procedures that we like to call methods and materials and papers that most researchers have to do to replicate and duplicate, or at least try to duplicate results to make sure whatever the researchers found were credible and pretty much true. And then I put an asterisk into facts because most research try to establish facts, but no one really states it as facts because chances are in the future, if new technology come to fruition, or if some other scientist comes and disproves them, they're not really a fact anymore. So the reach new conclusions part is more accurate. So I gave research a new definition that I pretty much created. I like to think of it as curiosity's pursuit of new knowledge through a methodical process similar to systematic in order to establish discoveries, conclusions, and theories. This definition is a little more broad, but I feel it's more encompassing of all research, both scientific and humanitarian. All research starts with an idea, and the idea is starting from curiosity. An individual is curious about why things are the way things are. And they pursue it through a process or methods that they experiment. They can try to observe, and then they will then establish discoveries, conclusions after they draw results. So that's enough about research. What are the different sectors of scientific research? The first half of these slides will be about what research is for the students, and then the second half will be how to get involved. So what exactly is sectors of scientific research? So there are 2 main research scientifically. There are numerical or theoretical versus experimental. So inside numerical and theoretical, these are the research that is harder to test tangibly. We can't really do labs on these because they're more abstract. Examples would be mathematics, right? You have your numbers and equations. It's very difficult to test these without technology or simulations. Another one would be physics. We can test experimentally physics, but most of it, when we get to a higher level, is mostly theoretical physics. For example, string theory by Einstein can use other physics theories, mostly theoretical. We have statistics, heavily numerical, and we have astronomy, which is also heavily theoretical or numerical, unless you are in a lab somewhere that owns a telescope and can actually experiment on it. but most of them will be within numerical and theoretical. Now, the opposite half is experimental, which is mostly what I conduct in. Biology is an example. You would run different labs we call wet labs, where you can run, let's say, DNA polymerase chain reactions, where you test to see different DNAs. You can run different methods to see if a DNA is similar to another. You can test for chemistry labs. For example, people who are taking chemistry in high school understand maybe redox. You can also take other chemistry labs to where you test to see if a certain compound and another compound mix, what would happen. Computation is also experimental. So here is where the technology will come to play. This is what I largely specialize in, computational experiments. For example, some things that maybe us as humans would take longer time to do. For example, if we have to test to see if something is true, we might run it multiple times. If we want to test to see if, let's say, variable X is correlated to variable Y, us humans have to run that experiment hundreds, if not thousands of times, while a computer can do that by itself on a loop. That'll take maybe a few hours. Saves a lot of time, more time efficient, which is computation. And there are also animal sciences and agriculture. For example, we have animal sciences, which are just, for example, pretty much a lot of these are going to be biological as well. For example, fruit flies are some animals, cows are some animals that they test on, and then also chickens and mouse. And agriculture is for energy. For example, anti-climate change would be agriculture sciences. They'll be testing certain crops are more sustainable, how much they yield, can they change certain chemistry within the crops to make them yield more. And then lastly, psychology, which also falls within neurology, which is how the brain works and why it works the way it works. All of these can be considered experimental studies. Now, all of these are solo topics. However, research is super broad and super complex. So more than half the time, any research you see are largely going to be a combination of all of them. So mathematics and biology, there's courses on mathematical biology. For example, what is the math behind why certain DNA binds with this compound on the other? There are computational physics. There are ways to simulate real theories that physicists have made and see if it holds true. There are statistical anything really. Almost all research needs some sort of statistical basis to see is it statistically true or false. And then, there's a huge mix. So what exactly happens if the research topics were combined? And this is where I do most of my research, is in something called interdisciplinary research, which as the name suggests, you are combining different disciplines. Examples would be bioinformatics, which is something I've done for about 3 years now. Also astrophysics, which I have a few friends who are doing that. And also biochemistry, which is a few majors that are offered at current colleges. These are all examples. So as the name suggests, bioinformatics is just doing anything biology or wet lab related biology, chemistry, through computers to test to see if certain things hold true without actually having to do the work. Astrophysics is doing astrology without the equipments, however, using physical terms. So an example of this would be trying to detect the trajectory of an asteroid falling onto Earth. You can use physics to prove those astronomies. Biochemistry is quite straightforward. It is the chemistry within biology. For example, what exactly is chemistry in DNA? What exactly is the chemistry in different animals and plants versus humans? That would be biochemistry. And then here is a little bit about my journey. So here's what I would do. Some students who are following along, there are going to be some that you could probably also try to follow. For example, reaching out. This is going to be something that is going to be quite generic, is reaching out to individuals and professors. If for parents who might use LinkedIn, you will know what that is. You can use LinkedIn to reach out to professors. If it's virtual, you can use WeChat, which is largely what I used. Just WeChat, we found professors over WeChat, and then we just connected over them. But for me, I reached out over WeChat to certain professors, and then I found an organization called NGIST, which the acronym is kind of long, but it's pretty much an organization which promotes middle and high schoolers to go into research who are largely ambitious and curious about sciences, and give them chances to pair up with different professors across the US and their institutions to work with their lab to produce some results, in hopes that they realize whether they want to pursue research further or not. So that is NGIST. So I joined them in my 10th grade year. And then I joined a lab by Dr. Ching, who works at Emory. And their lab was focusing on epigenetics. So epigenetics is a more technical term that many students may not understand. Epigenetics is pretty much the genetics or the inside rundown of why things run differently within people. For example, twins. We understand that twins have largely biological similarities, right? Twins are pretty similar biologically speaking, but there's still some differences. So epigenetics are the things that account for those differences other than like personalities, like different expressions or different other techie words that I'm not going to try to use too much, so to confuse you. But in large, short rundown, epigenetics is the makeup of different things. So, and then after working with epigenetics, once again, I'm working in bioinformatics, so largely it's going to be virtual without me having to do labs. So I started learning a coding language because I realized I'll have to use this as my methods for me to do research. I use something called R. This is a very common statistical program. And R is great at a few things. One is running large simulations really fast, and two is visualizing the data. So a lot of large data makes it really hard for people to look at and understand with just numbers on a table sheet. So what I did is I learned how to use R, and it made graphs, pretty graphs that pretty much anyone can read and understand if given enough like color legends or like the directions. So here's where I started learning research procedures in R code. And then we would go through Zoom to finalize weekly meetings. And I would meet with both the PI, which is a personal investigator or your mentor really, and then also my lab partners. And my lab partner for 10th grade, his name was Peter. He was a sophomore at Emory. I think he might have graduated now. But I worked with him closely on the lab project, and he helped me a lot with both the biology about how epigenetics works, because I had no idea when I was in 10th grade, much like probably everyone else. And then he also helped me like change and like correct some of the code as well, make it more efficient. Well, after that, I started working with him for a few months, and after we finalized a draft of the project, I submitted it to a conference. And then after I was accepted to the conference, which was MC BioWest, I started prepping for a competition. So here's where a large part of my own like solo preparation came in. I reviewed all the materials that I had prepared. I started rehearsing my speeches, and then I started thinking of like prepping questions that interviewers were asked. So for people who don't know what conferences are a more laid back way of a competition. These are mostly for students, usually undergraduates who have done research in a faculty's lab. They will present their research, and then people ask questions about them. Be like, oh, I'm interested in research. What have you done? Can you tell me a little bit more about it? And start probing me for questions. In this, we have a more competition-based for high schoolers. For this, I competed in a poster conference. So there are two types of conference competitions. Usually there is a poster one and an oral one. A poster competition is where you have a whole research and you put it on like a 32 by 40 or 36 by 42 like poster board. And you try to like explain it really quickly in an elevator speech. And then like a judge will come up and ask you questions. The second one is oral presentation, which is like what I'm doing right now. It's like a Google Slides presentation on your whole research from beginning to end. These are much longer. And then people will ask you deeper in-depth questions on your research as well. So I competed in poster competition for the high school division because that's all they were allowed for. And I won third from my first poster competition out of, I forgot how many competitors, but I think it was around 100. And then leading up, I competed in science fairs. But this is something I will touch on later as well. Science fairs are a great way for students to get involved with research. So in science fairs, I competed in regional ISEF, which ISEF is the international science fair across pretty much the world, really. And then there's about 22 categories. So this is a super large span of categories. There's robotics, there's biochemistry, there's psychology, there's computational, etc. So I competed in science fairs in different levels. So for Indiana, which is where I'm located, they compete in the regional fair, and then you move on to state if you place top 2. If you place top 4 at state, you will move on to ISEF. Different states have different regulations. So if you're not in Indiana or if you're in a different state, you want to compete in science fairs, I would ask your school first, probably your like, science head or faculty at your school. You ask them about if they know anything about science fairs, and they can probably help you. If they don't, then you can search it up probably. Most of them have websites for people to register and compete. So yeah, and then 11th grade. So moving on to 11th grade, the first thing that happened in 11th grade was that the manuscript, which is an unpublished paper, is the technical term for manuscript, was accepted after my lab and I, with Dr. Ching and them, finished drafting our paper, and then we sent it for review. It got denied first of all, and then we re-edited it and then resubmitted it, and it got accepted. So the paper was published, which was my first co-authored paper. And then afterwards, I reached out to a new professor because this professor's lab, we have completed our project. So that is how NGIC likes to do things. We have students experiment around different topics they might be interested in until they find a certain one or they want to continue with new projects. So after finishing Dr. Ching, I wanted to experiment with a few other topics. So I reached out to new professors through NGIC's network. in which I found Dr. Liu. Dr. Liu is a professor at Baylor College of Medicine, and I joined his lab of postdocs with a few other high schoolers in the NGIST to work on something called machine learning. Machine learning is best defined by the term itself, which is where a machine just learns through trial and error. For example, if you had a machine determine pictures, or whether it's like a cat or dog and they get it wrong, you can manually reset it and say, oh, that's wrong. They'll keep getting it until they get it right. They will repeat it infinite amount of times until you think the accuracy is deemable. And that is machine learning. Machine learning is quite similar to AI, but it's a more minuscule, like drawn down version. But after that, I started learning a new coding language called Linux, which is a software that runs based off bash command. So a super old command. You can think of it like command prompt on your Windows if you have a Windows. Linux is for a server. So a server is a computational setting where you can have multiple programmers on one server and they can all code at the same time. And the code can be accessed by anyone on the server. So it's a network of different programmers and programs in which we use Linux mostly because all of our data was super large, over in the gigabytes. So we all threw into a server instead of our actual computers for two reasons. One, for safety concerns, because for this topic, I was dealing with clinical. So for a little bit of background, the topic I'm doing with Dr. Liu at that time was on clinical bioinformatics, where we were trying to see if there were causal genes within a family, maybe that was inherited, that could cause developmental disorders, and whether we can identify it using machine learning. So with how many clinical patients for privacy matters and also for security, we put it in a server that was encrypted and that anyone within our group can access anytime without having to ask for permission, and also because it saves storage on our own hard drive in a computer. So I started learning Linux, which is my second programming language. And then same thing as 10th grade year, we just finalized meetings all the way to finalized research, pretty much weekly. And then same thing here, compete at science fairs. And then this is after I pretty much graduated 11th grade. So up until the graduation of 11th grade, ISEF was over. That's usually in the summer, around June. And then I took this presentation to compete at more conferences, because this is before I started drafting the paper. So I had multiple conferences. I went to IEEE, which is a conference for my niche field, really, is for computational biology. And I went to a few other conferences across Dallas, Las Vegas, Philadelphia. And then I won some grants. So ISEF grants, which stands for National Science Foundation, they like to give scientific scholarships. What grants are, they will pretty much pay for your travel there, depending on if you have a apt science paper or depending on financial need, one of the two. It depends based on the conference. But I won a few grants to travel, and so I did, and it was pretty fun. So conferences are great for a few reasons. One, obviously, to show off how much you've learned in terms of research as a student. You need to communicate with a lot of, usually 99%, older competitors, for example, undergraduate students, graduate students, or you can also see a few professors lecturing there. You can always talk to them about their research. You can ask them about advice if you want to pursue research in college or how to continue. And that's also a great way to network, right? So for example, obviously not everyone's going to be at NGIST, but if you have a professor and you realize that all your project's closing in, maybe you don't want to continue this project, you want to continue a different topic, you can go to a conference, meet a few professors, and ask around to see if, you have a spot open in your lab that I can join. Or, hey, I'm interested in this. Here's my current research that you saw. Do you think that I can join your lab because I'm also interested in X, Y, or Z? Also a great way to find new professors. So heavily encourage conferences. And then lastly, this is 12th grade year before I graduated. So after we finished the lab with Dr. Liu, I wrote a first authored paper on my own topics. So Dr. Liu, we were talking about the software itself. And then here I did a side project and where I just tried to expand on different families, and see by myself if I can find the results, in which I confirmed with both Dr. Liu and a few other mentors and postdoctorates. And they said that it was fine. And it says that the results were worthy of publishing. The draft data went through multiple revisions and I finally published it within a conference. And then after I reached out to my last network. So before college, I've always had this idea of trying to experiment as much as I can across different topics to determine what I actually like before going to college. So when I get to college, I have a running start. So I joined a different group. This time I joined Dr. Ye's lab, and he worked at University of Georgia. And I worked closely with this graduate student, Yi Tong, and their project was on Mendelian inheritance, which is probably an unknown word for most audience members here. So Mendelian inheritance, the key word is Mendelian. If you think for students who are in middle school or high school, if you think of Gregor Mendel, the p-plots he had before, This is just that, but scaled out 2,000 years in the future with computers. And the inheritance is where we try to see if, just like the pea plants, we can find certain inheritance traits that are passed down from a family member that make it more, let's say, perceptible to certain diseases. For example, my topic was on white blood cells and obesity. Let's say you have a grandfather who was morbidly obese. Would it be more likely that you have a predisposition to obesity in your generation, or would it not matter at all? That was pretty much what we were testing. And then we were also testing for, in the white blood cell count, does white blood cells have a causal relationship to inducing obesity or reducing it, stuff like that. So it's really more of a causal relationship estimate. So luckily, we use the same software, we use the same coding language, R, for this one as well, to run simulations and to pretty much visualize all the data. So much easier on the coding aspect for me. And then afterwards, because of how busy I was with college applications, I didn't really compete this year for science fairs. I just mostly did MC Battle West, which was the same conference I did 10th grade year. This year, I went up a division and went to the undergraduate division, in which I won the top award in poster competition, which was largely just speaking and then presenting, also answering questions. And then, okay, so here's the more important part, assuming is why everyone joined, is how to get involved in science and research, right? So for the students, here are a few ways to get involved in school. You can join clubs, you can take related honors and AP courses, or you can register for Olympiads. You can do as many as your schedule allows for, and as many as you personally can find the time for, really. So which clubs did you really join, or that I would recommend? First, there are Olympiad clubs. So for example, Science Olympiad is one. Science Olympiad is pretty common, I would say, around high schools. Almost every high school that is pretty competitive has a Science Olympiad club. This is where you do a lot of self-learning. Science Olympiad is a lot of self-learning. I have a lot of friends who are in Science Olympiad. They spend a lot of time just self-learning their own topics, their own niches, because I've heard the topics change every year. But you learn a lot about a singular topic and go compete at it with other students. And then there are levels from just invitationals all the way up to nationals. So that's Science Olympiad. Second is competition-based clubs. This will include like National Science Bowl. I also have friends in Science Bowl, which are similar to Science Olympiad, but much smaller on a scale. And Science Bowl is really just any competition that you like trivia style competition where you buzz in and answer scientific questions. This you can also learn a lot from both competition experience and also for studying purposes. And lastly, there are pre-professional clubs that can help you get assimilated to research, would be like HOSA. HOSA, I have friends in HOSA. I'm not personally in any of the three clubs actually, but for HOSA, I know that it's a lot of it's very similar to science fairs. You would make a poster, you would prepare a talk based off a topic that you would choose. So for example, if you choose something on, let's say, multiple sclerosis, which is a disease and disorder, the bones, you can say, oh, I'm going to do multiple sclerosis, and that's going to be my topic for HOSA. You prepare with a few friends if you want a poster, you can prepare a speech, you prepare to answer questions. Super similar format to science fair. So this would be a really good preparation for science fairs if you plan to do that. And then for specific courses, there's two answers. The short answer is yes, but the best answer is depends. It depends on what you're looking for, really. There are a ton of AP courses that schools could offer, or even if they don't offer it, you can always go into like Khan Academy or any online resources like Princeton Review, self-learn it and take it yourself. But there are some courses that would benefit a lot in terms of both colleges and also in terms of research that would be beneficial. For example, would be AP chemistry. If you're doing chemical research, obviously you want a strong foundation in chemistry in order to do chemistry level undergraduate research. That I would recommend that. Same with biology and physics. If you're doing theoretical research in physics, then you probably need AP Physics 1, 2, and 3. AP Biology is just normally good to have as a foundation for any science-based research. And the last two would be the more like higher level like research. AP Calc usually isn't needed in research, but it's good to have for critical thinking skills. And then lastly, AP Statistics. AP Statistics is quite beneficial because almost all research, as I said before, you'll probably need some sort of statistical finding or basis for your research to tell other people why your research is credible. Instead of saying, oh, I believe it's credible, you want to have empirical evidence for the reviewers, which are people who look at your paper and say, oh, we can publish this, or oh, this is not good enough yet to publish. So the best way to do that is give them numbers saying, oh, we are 99% sure statistically that this is confident and we are true and this is right. And they'll be like, oh, okay, we understand, versus I think I'm 99% sure that this is going to work. And that's like your word against mine, right? So AP Statistics is quite useful when you're doing any experimental research especially. So I would heavily encourage AP Stats. And then lastly is what are Olympiads? So Olympiads, by my definition, is pretty much multi-stage competitions that pretty much evaluate students' comprehension in a certain subject. So this varies. I would assume probably some students here have done some sort of Olympiads. For example, IMO, International Math Olympiad, is the highest level of math. The lower levels would be like AMI, math comps, stuff like that, and also like math Olympiad programs. Those are all part under the branches of International Olympiad for math. There are informatics ones, which is a lot of just coding. More like practical coding would be like International Informatics Olympiad. And then there's also for physics, there's Physics Olympiad. We take multiple choice exams and you like go into different simulations and you do like FRQs almost. There are also chemistry Olympiads, obviously, and then there are also computing Olympiads. So there are a bunch of Olympiads that a lot of students like to do, super popular among high school students for both self purposes and also for college purposes. But these are super competitive and they all take a lot of self-studying and ambition. So if you're looking into something more like solo related, maybe you don't want to work in a team or you don't feel like, or maybe you don't have a good opportunity to work with professors, these are always a good way to like get started into like in college. It's like, oh, hey, I've done this before and I want to pursue research in college. Once you get on college grounds, you can find a faculty member, you'll be like, oh, I've done this before. So I have a pretty strong basis in X topic. Say you want to do physics research in college. And then maybe you don't have like experience, right? But you can say, oh, I've done like International Physics Olympiad. Then the faculty will automatically know, oh, you're good at physics and you can reach international level. So they'd be more willing to take you on board and be like, okay, you can join me and we do like research together. The Olympiads are overall a pretty good way to open a door for a lot of research opportunities. But there are more ways to get involved outside of school. So almost all of mine are outside of school. There are two types. There's traditional research, where you do it in groups. There's individual research, both of which are perfectly fine in my case, or in my opinion, really. Traditional research would be like, I think your lab research, right? The people with the white coats, that's lab research. You have your science fairs, you have your conferences, that's all traditional research. Individual research, you have your self-investigations and individual studies. These would be like stuff you do in courses such as like AP research, which is an AP course, which you pretty much conduct individual research in your own time. You don't need a professor, you don't need an adult. You just can take your own research and then you go through your school and get it approved. And there's also summer programs, which I heavily encourage. A lot of summer programs are a mix between individual and traditional research. Some summer programs let you do individual research under a mentor. Some summer programs put you in a group and you guys do research together through labs and traditional research, like more traditional research like setting. But summer programs are usually a great way to get assimilated research and also to pretty much like highlight your college applications. But for research outside of school, first, this has to start with cold emailing professors. This is the golden rule for pretty much reaching out and networking with anyone. You must make yourself known. So you have to do a cold email to a bunch of professors. A cold email is pretty much where you say, hi, my name is X. I am interested in research in your field. And preferably the tip with cold emailing is you want to make yourself seem like you have a connection with the person. And the easiest way for professors is to read their papers, right? You read their papers, see if you're interested, and be like, oh, hi, my name is X. I'm interested in your field of research. I read a few papers titled this and that from your work dated in like 2021, right? Like, oh, I'm still wondering if you're still currently researching on that. I have a few ideas. Do you have time to like maybe meet me on a Zoom call and discuss? And then after the Zoom call, if it goes well, you get to maybe like, you ask him, oh, do you have room in your lab? Can I join? Worst case scenario, well, you'll get 3 responses from code emailing. Either A, they would not respond, just super normal, because professors usually have EDU emails, just like institutional-based emails that will report like outside of EDU emails as spam, which they could not see it. Very normal. They could say no if their lab is full or they're not trying to recruit like high school students, also normal. Or under this like the slight circumstance that you say yes, that's the best case scenario, right? You code email someone you didn't know, you work with them, you learn under them, and you publish papers, you research. But normally, let's say it worked well, right? It worked out and you were the professor. Then normally you would join a lab, you would compete with the research that you learned, and then you would present in conferences. You can go down either or both trails to compete or present, depending on if you're more ambitious, you have to compete against other people to see how good you are answering questions, versus if you like to show off a little bit more of what you know and you just like to network with a lot more people. Conferences are also the way to go. Both of them are perfectly fine. And then questions about how to conduct research independently. So this is for like the 90% of people who probably can't find a professor, right? So this will be identify a topic you're interested in. This is something you will learn in like AP courses for research or seminar, which is offered at some schools, not all. But first you have to identify the topic you're interested in. In fact, to the definition I posed like previously about like curiosity's pursuit, right? So if you're interested in something like super niche, say like, it can be something bizarre. It can be like, how does chapsticks have like flavors? It can be something as abstract as that. Identify a topic, read papers, or scientific papers. You can look at PubMed or NCBI. They're both databases full of scientific papers that have a lot of precedence and have a lot of users actively. So you read papers about your topic, you begin background research, because before you dive in, you want to know how other people did it. You have to understand how other people define their methods, how they pose their question, frame their question, made it understandable and relatable to other people. If it's not relatable, not everyone's going to read it. So use PubMed and CBI to identify background research. After you do so, determine the appropriate methodology to start experimenting. And this is important for a couple reasons. One, to make sure your results are actually going to be like conclusive. You want to have a good methodology, but also it's going to be accepted by the general majority. For example, if let's say you're in a lab, let's say you're working on animal sciences, but then your methodology is something more like theoretical, like physics, you give them like formulas, they might not accept that as a proof methodology for a specific topic, which is why make sure you read your background research, make sure you read it deeply, understand it, understand why they do the things they do, and then you can move on to your determining methodology. And then after you assume you have your methodology done, you collect data from experiments, you do like at-home experiments, and you start summarizing results. And lastly, you would draft, revise, peer review your manuscript and get it ready for publishing. So anyone can really publish. It's you don't always need like some sort of like big institution behind your back to push a paper into publications. You can start with like student journal, and then you can, after you get some like recognition, like you pretty much up your writing pretty much, you can then publish out to like larger journals like Frontiers or some other journals depending on your topic. So different journals have different topics. For example, Frontiers have multiple different subsections, which is a journal that has different branches. For example, big data. They have one in big data, they have one in communications, they have one in psychology, depending on your topic. That is the final step. That is the end all be all, like great, you made it type of feeling. So that is research independently. Now, last thing I want to touch upon is summer programs. These I like to push a lot because summer programs I feel are super beneficial for a lot of high schoolers, especially. First, summer programs are a great way for people who lack opportunities in the lab to get involved in real-time research under the guidance of professionals. Most summer programs will hire PhD professors from colleges or PhD people who are retired to help come in and lecture or straight up just teach for weeks on end to high schoolers about what it's like to do research and then guide them about how to do certain research processes. And if you get stuck, you can ask a professor, who will be right there. Versus like if you had to like email them over cold email, they respond like a week later, stuff like that. So a few examples are SSP. This is one I did and I loved. SSP stands for Summer Science Program. They have multiple tracks. For example, astrophysics, biochemistry, and genomics are the 3 tracks. Genomics is new. I did it last year when they first opened. So heavily encourage SSP. A few other well-known ones are NASA has summer programs for different internships. So does the Simons Research Program at Stony Brook University. And then also RSI. RSI is the most competitive summer program with acceptance rate about 3%. It is the Research Science Institute, where they conduct usually the last one for RSI is usually for students who've done research beforehand and have experience with research, but they want to up their game to the next level. That would be what RSI is for, really. You would pretty much work individually, really, under a professor, and you guys would go through a few weeks, I think a few weeks to a month plus of straight research, and you guys will present it like a conference setting at the very end of the program. And almost all of these are residential. I'm pretty sure SSP, Stony Brook, RSI, all residential. They go away, you do research, kind of like a research retreat, and you come back, and that would be your summer program. Super beneficial. You meet a lot of fun people there who are also in your same interest. And then also, it's a great bonding experience. So the final message I like to send is that curiosity is what starts opportunities. For example, if you aren't curious about a topic, you're not going to cold email. If you don't cold email professors, you won't get a lab. If you don't get a lab, it's hard to start research, right? Second, the other flip of the coin would be if you're not curious, don't start individual studies. If you don't start individual studies, once again, no research opportunities. So all start with curiosity. If you're interested in something, go ahead and pursue it. Worst case is they say no or they don't respond. But if the more you try, statistically speaking, you're going to hit someone. So be curious. And that is the end of my talk, and thank you for listening. I saw there were a few questions in the chat, so I'll answer them one by one. First one. Oh, yeah, Justin, sorry.
So